What's up, y'all? It's Kevin, and this is a video on the nineherbscharm, specifically the Woden stanza translated. And for those of you who are not familiar with Anglo-Saxon literature, and by extension Anglo-Saxon pre-Christian spirituality, that Woden is the king of the gods, and we have his name attested here in this text here of the nineherbscharm. Woden is synonymous with Odin, found, or if you will, in Old Norse, Odin, right? So, and here's the verse itself: Tha genam Woden nigun wuldortanas, and we'll translate this text as we go along, line by line, but to have the text in full, we have thus nigun machon with nigun attrum wurnd kom snikan toslat heman tha genam Woden nigun wuldortanas sloch tha nadran that heel on nigun to vlag thar je andade appel and attor that heel navre na wolde on hus buran. And thus begins our translation. So, thas neon machon with neon attrum. So what's going on here? So we have thas here, which is like saying these. So that's a plural definite article. Or you could say determiner, but so it's like saying this. So, but a plural form. So, in the nominative. Nominative. So it's like, and then neon is just 9. It's funny how I have the impression that when it comes to Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, you do have some lack of a better term, authors. Well, I shouldn't say authors, or people who study manuscripts. Sometimes when they publish it to the public in a book for the public, sometimes they would edit it and what they would think would be a mistake, because we have to bear in mind even scribes of back then, they were human in that they were subject to making errors, and this is a very common thing with Anglo-Saxon literature, what to say of literature of this time period, where you had people that would make proverbial, dare if I say, spelling mistakes. But then again, that's a quite odd thing to say, because this is a time way before standardized spelling. You do have similar spelling conventions within Anglo-Saxon literature to delineate dialects. But then it's not a hard and fast rule, so to speak, because you would see variations of like one dialect like mixed with another within the same text, or you would have like an older form of a word next to a more recent form of the same word, or what have you. So, but with this text in particular, in other, I guess, in the original or if you will, or in other versions of it, per se, instead of neon there, like thos neon, it'd be the 9 would be written in Roman numerals, or what have you. So the main thing what I'm trying to get with this point is that like not everything you see from that is in Old English is directly from the period. You kind of have to read like the introductions of these books where the texts are published to or read the footnotes to determine, like what is like from the manuscript itself and what it actually says, and the distinction between what the editor has put in, because it does happen to be the case where you'd have a scribe, having a proverbial spelling error, or what have you. Anyway, but that is an aside. But anyway, so das nigun machon with nigun attrum. Okay, so As for the grammar, thus is in the nominative, plural. These nine, and machon, this is a verb dealing with the verb machen, meaning it's the origin of our word may, but in Old English, depending on the context, it's often used to mean like the way we use the word can today, as in to be able to do something. But with Old English, used in that context, that would mean like can, but within the context of being able within the context of possibility. It is possible to do that. But in this context, usually in the can context, you would have like another verb in the infinitive to, like, for example, if I want to say I can sing, it in that it's possible for me to sing, it's my singan, but this is a little different because we don't have an extra verb where this mahon would be used as a proverbial auxiliary. Rather, it's just on its own. So the context here, what we're dealing with, is that mahon is being used to mean like, meaning that it's just having ability in that. Hang on, let me just show you the translation that I put here. So these nine were, I'm going to probably embarrass myself by trying to pronounce this word, efficacious, against 9 poisons. Okay, so we got with here 9, and that got atrum, and the atrum is in the proverbial. It's in the dative, and it's in the dative because the preposition with there. When it comes to the context of hostility, then it takes the dative. And it's funny how some numbers in Old English, anything after 3, after numbers 1 to 3, where you'd have inflected forms of 1, 2, and 3, and maybe to 4 and to some degree, but generally with numbers in Old English, they tend to be uninflected, which is interesting of itself. But you can inflect them, but you would have to look at the forms up, and I would highly recommend using the BT dictionary, the Anglo-Saxon Bosworth and Toller dictionary. But from the period here, we definitely see a non-inflected forms of these numbers. So these 9 were efficacious. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, forgive me. But anyway, against 9 poisons, and in this context, it means against, like synonymous, where like if I were to say I was fighting with the orcs, that's like saying I was fighting against the orcs. So that's sort of the mood of, or context, how the word with is being used here. So so these 9 were efficacious against 9 poisons. So moving right on. Worm kom snikan toslat heman. Okay, this is interesting. So worm is a worm, is where our word worm comes from, but back then it meant sort of like creeping thing. So it could mean as an earthworm, as we would, as we would imagine, like you dig in the ground and you find something, find that serpent looking thing. But rather it's creeping thing, to be very to be sort of literal about it. So worm came to sneak. So sneak on here in the infinitive, and toslat is interesting. It's why don't we just go right with the translation? So worm came to sneak. He tore apart someone. So the second half here is pretty interesting. So toslat, this is in the past tense, and the thing is with toslat, it could mean to tear apart, or tear asunder, or tear to pieces. It's really from that tool where we get that from. That like that tool is like dispersing, like if that makes sense. So toslat hey man, and man here. Though on the manuscript, it would say nan, and then from there, some people would translate that as like none and whatnot, but like, but that wouldn't make sense. Like, okay, so for example, let me just like show you. So if it really was like non, as in like not one, let's say a negation of like he tore about no one. But thing is, this wouldn't make much sense because, well, I'm not so sure. Like, I don't really buy that this being because thing is, it's also noted that this should be read as man, where, because if it really was non, it would have to be inflected. Yeah, it would have to be inflected. And if it were to be not one, because the word on, when you use it in a sentence, like meaning one, well, in a later period, it can be used like an indefinite article, like he, like a man was da 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 da, but like as well, on is also used in the context of the way you would say alone or only. All right, so that's something to bear in mind. And the thing is, if it really was on, I'm just thinking now, like, if I were to mentally speculate, if this really was that meant nothing, like, I don't know, like, it just like, it'd be like saying he tore apart nothing, but that wouldn't make sense within the context of what the rest of the poem. So it wouldn't make sense for this to say man, where man in this context, it would be like saying how you'd say in German today, Mann, meaning saying one, like one who does that. Or in Old English, to say very plainly, like a person, you would use man. As opposed to, if you want to be very specific about, like, if you want to express like an individual did this, then you would use had. Or like if you want to say, oh, that character from that story, you'd use had. But if you want to speak in very general terms, a person or what have you, you'd use man. And it would make sense that because within the context of the text here, we're talking about poisons and protecting yourself, and so it would make sense that this would be read as man for what next is about to happen. So I think I really got this one. Moving on. Tho genam Woden nigun wuldortanas. Tho genam Woden nigun wuldortanas. So what do we have here? Okay, so we got thaw. And the word thaw in Old English, this is something to be really, really taken to heart, so to speak. The word thaw can mean a bunch of things. It's a very key thing to understand how Old English operates, or rather how West Germanic languages operate during this time. Because the thing is, we don't want to just close ourselves to only Old English. We got to understand the West Germanic mind, if you will, or I shouldn't limit to that, but West Germanic languages of this time and how they operated. So thaw, in this context, is not like the plural as a definite article, but rather it's an adverb. It's like saying when. Yeah, it's like saying when. And then if you have them within the same context, it's like saying then and then when. But depending on the context, it also can mean then. So within this context, so we know that something happened, and we go back here. The worm came and tore apart tore apart someone, or tore someone to pieces. Um, Tore one to pieces. Then, yeah, I mean, since that happened, uh, I mean, you could translate that as this as then, but then, um, but actually, let's carry on. So when thaw yenam woden, so yenam is from the verb yeniman, which means to take, to seize. Cognate to today's German nehmen, meaning to take. And I believe the BT dictionary goes to throw in that in a time of Shakespeare, early modern English, that you have a slang term nim, meaning like to steal or something like that. Or maybe this word could survive in some dialectal context that I'm not aware of, but it'd be a very old word. In fact, I would think it'd be obsolete by this point, because we're talking about such an old Germanic word. So, and this is, okay, so we have neman, yeneman here, and this is in the past indicative. So Woden took, or took Woden nigun wuldortanas. Now, 9 wuldortanas. Now, wuldor is glory, and tanas means twigs. And we're talking about plants here, in the context of plants. But given the nature of Woden being the king of the gods and whatnot, you could, and I believe Felix Grendon, I hope I have that name right, Felix Grendon, in his book regarding Anglo-Saxon charms, he translates this part as 9 thunderbolts. I think he's deriving from the context of that, from the celestial god, metaphysical personality Woden, and drawing from that, this sort of like, because we have to bear in mind these kennings, these poetical compounds, to like for example, if I were to say like a way to call the ocean would be like whale road, as you would see in Beowulf. Or to say a bone house would be a very poetic way of saying a body, right? So similarly, glory twigs, and knowing that word Woldor and Woden are associated with celestial glory and godly and all that, so it makes sense how Felix Grandin would translate this as a canning for thunderbolts, and I would agree with this. Agree with this assessment, but or interpretation, if you will. But moving right on. Oh, yeah, sorry. So grammar. Okay, so what's in the nominative here? It's Woden. The verb nianam. What's in the accusative? It's in wuldortanas. So then, because what did Woden take? Well, Woden took the 9 wuldortanas, the glory twigs, aka thunderbolts. But let's move right on. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so sloch thaw nadran that heel on neon toflach. Okay, so this is really interesting in itself. Again, we got that thaw and thaw. So both of them together, it's interesting. Again, they're right next to each other. A lot of the times, depending where you see thaw, it could mean then when, or it could mean when then, depending on the context. But also it could mean then the, because how do we know this? Well, or it. Oh man. So let me explain the grammar. Oh my god. Okay, so we got then the serpent. Why then the serpent? And it's singular here. Well, this word here is actually feminine. So, and the feminine accusative singular is thaw, which adds more to the confusion of thaw. So like thaw of itself needs its own like you need like whole like series on thaw and how to use it and how a thaw is used, and it requires some tedious studying on like how old English operates in the context of thaw. That's why I recommend having a side by side translation and looking up each word, and careful study of the BT Anglo-Saxon dictionary, the Bosworth Taller Anglo-Saxon dictionary, right? So, okay, so sloch thaw thaw, so slew then the serpent, that it in nine flew apart. Okay, so sloch is slew, past tense. Like this is the origin of the word slay, and slay is cognate to German schlagen, meaning to hit or to strike. Similarly with well, in Old English, slan, it also means like to hit, like to strike, but within the context that it would die, right? So, and that hail on neon to flag. So that it in nine flew apart. So hail, this is a personal pronoun. It's she. If you were to literally translate it, but we're talking about a snake here, a serpent, right? And this thing is, we have grammatical gender here. Well, this word here is feminine, as mentioned earlier. So it's, and thus its personal pronoun to refer to in the third person would be hail, right? So that it in on in neon and nine, and unfortunately the text doesn't tell us in nine what nine. I guess it's implicitly expecting us to think nine parts, nine pieces, nine what have you. And toflag is like flew apart, or you could say flew to pieces, flew asunder. Again, so that toll is like just like try to think of it as dispersing or breaking apart. So yeah, I think with my translation it'll be just apart. And just to hang on, let me just, okay, so the whole then when thing. So in my context, so that when Woden took the 9 glory twigs, thunderbolts, slew then the serpent that in 9 flew apart. Okay, cool. Moving right on. Thar je andade appel and attor. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. We have alliteration there. We got the ash. Well, kind of, almost. Appel. We got ash there and an a on the attor, and then we got ye andade. And if you were to throw away that ge prefix, you have andade, which is kind of alliteration, but that's anyway. But that's just an observation on my part. But okay, so this is my translation. The word thar, depending on the context, it could mean where, but also could mean there. Okay, like where in the context that like, oh, so and so where he did that, or where you could replace that there he did that, like so how can I explain this in a present day English example? So Johnny went to London where he sang a song. I could, in that context where Johnny sang a song, I could easily replace it with there. Well, in Old English, you would have thar uh, to mean that where, as opposed to where. That's more in the interrogative, like or like more in the context of asking a question, like, oh, like, where are you, like, where are you? um, I hope that makes sense. But anyway, so there where je andade ended, and this is the past tense, ended. um, this is from the verb endian. We have an interesting variation of spelling here. With the ash there and the ending there. It's like ada. Uh, as well, you also see, depending on the variation of spelling, you see oda, so, or it could be ye and oda, but we instead we have the a variation of ye and oda, which is interesting of itself. So appel and ator. Okay, so this is pretty interesting of itself, because appel, yes, it is the origin of our word apple, but the word apple of itself in Old English can mean a number of things. It could mean very well the fruit that we're very familiar with, or it could be a loose way of saying fruit in general, or it could mean like that which is round, like a ball, like round as an apple, if you will. But I think in this context, since the text here is about plants, and I would think, again, this is just my interpretation of this text, right? So, and apple against poison. So interestingly, the word and here, not only is it a conjunction, but its same form it can be used in the, excuse me, as a preposition, and a preposition in the context of like being against, before, like in front of, so to speak, or in, depending on the context. And its object takes the accusative, and atstor is a neuter noun. So you could translate this as against, which in my opinion would make more sense than just an which and. I mean, if you were to translate just and as a conjunction, it would. Eh, it would make sense, but like we're talking about averting oneself from poisons, protecting oneself from poisons. So, um, like it's like there ended, or where ended fruit and poison, fruit against poison, or like that which is pro life, pro health, pro this, as opposed to against that which is pro death and pro unlife, and or what have you. Okay, I think I've I think I've really long-winded this, but anyway, let's move on to the next part. That heel navra that heel navra nawolde on whose buran. Okay. So we have that it never wanted in house dwell. I know that this translation is very clunky, not very well, very rugged. And the reason I do this on purpose is like it's more for helping you guys to learn the language. I mean, of course, for those of you who are learning this language, it helps to have things like translated straight, so to speak, as opposed to me rewording things how you would say it in present English and whatnot. So yeah, so that it or heo navra never, newolda not wanted, if you were to literally translate it, that it never wanted, on house, to buran. And buran, it does mean to dwell, to live, You know, like for example, if I were to ask, oh, where do you live? Well, I would use this verb, like to say, oh, waar buust thu, for example. So where do you live, right? Where do you dwell? So that okay. So okay, well, grammar time. Okay, so we got hail. What case is this in? Well, it's in the nominative because it's the subject of the sentence. Navra is an adverb. Ne is a negation. Wolde is a verb in the past tense. On is a preposition. Hus is a noun. Buchen is the verb. So I'm assuming, given the form of hus here, it's not in the nominative, but rather in the accusative. Yeah, so that is pretty much it. And let's move right on to the whole thing altogether. And this is with the modern English and the old English. And here we have my translation. But without further ado, I'll read the whole thing, followed by my translation. Thos neon machon with neon attrum, worn kom snekan, toslat heman, tha genam woden, neon wuldortanas. Sloch tha natedran, dat heel an neon toflag. Thar je andade, appel and attor, dat heel navre na wolde, on hus buran. These 9 were efficacious against 9 poisons. Worm came to sneak. He tore apart someone. When Woden took 9 glory twigs, thunderbolts, slew then the serpent, that in 9 flew apart. Where ended fruit against poison, that it never wanted in house dwell. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new, and if you really like the channel, please become a patron at my Patreon page down below. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.